Hey everybody, how are you and happy Sunday? I just wanted to come on really quickly and I wanted to ask a question. Are you becoming culture created? Have you become convinced that what culture says about you is more important and even more powerful than what God says about you? God says that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. He says that you're above only and not beneath. He says that you are the head and not the tail. He says that you are more than a conqueror. He even says that he is able to do exceedingly and abundantly above all that you can ask, according to the power that works in you. So when you think about who God says that you are versus what the culture says, right? Because the culture now is dictating the standard of beauty. Culture is now dictating what success means and what success looks like. Culture is dictating what relationships look like, what marriage looks like, what dating looks like. All of these various things now, culture is dictating. And so it's now gotten us to a place where we are turning into a culture created people, where we are somewhat, and even, I'm not even going to say somewhat, where we are slowly but surely turning away from what God says about us to what the culture says about us. And so my question today is, are you becoming a culture created person? Are you becoming a person who now is driven by what culture says about you as opposed to what God says about you? And I will even challenge you and ask you that if you are becoming a culture created person, is it possible that you're becoming this person because you're not convinced of what God says about you? That you're not convinced that you're above only and not beneath. You're not convinced that you're the head and not the tail. You're not convinced that you're more than a conqueror. You're not convinced. And so you become convinced in what the culture says about you, and your life is just starting to demonstrate that. Your life is starting to demonstrate that you are more connected to the culture than you are to the creator. Think about it. From, again, the beauty standards to what the standard of success means. Are you driven by what the culture says about those things as opposed to what God says about those things? There's success in God. There are things that can happen in your life based upon what God says about you. And there's a way to obtain those things. So the question again becomes, what are you driven by? Are you driven by the culture, or are you driven by who and what God says you are? I thought about it for my own self in different areas. You know, what am I driven by? Am I driven by what the culture says? Am I driven by what the culture says about, like I said earlier, about success or about beauty or about family, what it says about marriage, what it says about relationships? Am I driven by what the culture says, or am I driven by what God says? And so that's my challenge for you today. As you're going on with the rest of your day and you're going on into the new week, take a look at where you are right now and just examine it and look at it and say, am I doing or am I pursuing things based on what the culture says? Or am I doing things and am I pursuing things based on what God says? There's a big difference. Because with the culture, in the pursuit of what the culture says, there's not a lot of change that's required. But when you think about what God says, And when he talks about your pursuits and he talks about your growth and he talks about who you are and he talks about who you can become, a lot of change is required. With the culture, you can strive for things and you can, and the only thing that's really going to change so much is really all outward that changes, right? If you think about it, when you think about what culture says about who you are and who you can become, the only thing that really changes is the outward things, right? So you end up changing how you look. You end up changing the things that it's really more based on what I buy, the circles I'm in, those types of things, right? That's what the culture does, because the culture builds up the outside of who you are. But when you think about what God says that you are, you not only have to learn and understand and come into a relationship with him so you can understand who you are, but then there's some internal things that have to change about you too. With the culture, not so much. Because with the culture, you can easily fit in. Because all you have to do is buy the certain type of hair. All you got to do is put on a certain type of clothes. All you have to do is drive a specific kind of car. All you have to do is live in a specific place. All you have to do is have a certain type of career. All you have to do is have a certain type of business. And in the culture, you fit. In the culture, you fit. But when you are learning who God says that you are, when you're learning how to implement who he says that you are, regardless of where you live, regardless of how much money you make, regardless of what car you drive, regardless of the associations that you have, there is an internal thing that has to take place with you. And so all I'm saying to you today, and all I'm really asking is, are you being culture created? Or is your mind being renewed to who God says that you are? And when your mind is being renewed to who God says that you are, there is an internal thing that happens with you. And when the internal things change about you, then the outward things change about you just as much. Culture created versus who God says that I am. That's what I want you to think about for this week. Culture created versus who God says that I am. That's all I got. Have a good one. Bye.